Okay, so all of our note packets will be organized the same way. I forgot to tell you this also. I will record all of our notes. That's in case someone is absent, or that's in case you spaced out and weren't paying attention when I said something, and you need to go back and look at the video again. So I will always record things. This is how the notes are organized. On the front page, it will be everything that you need to know how to do. What I think this is helpful for is before you have a quiz or a test. Before you have a quiz or a test, I would just go through each of these numbers and make sure I knew how to do all of them. We are going to be doing these first two. So what we'll talk about today is a lot of vocabulary. We're going to talk about what is categorical data and how do we display it. So mostly some graphs. And then what I will always do on the bottom is tell you what you need to know how to do on the calculator. You will use this calculator more than you have in any other class ever. So there's a lot of things you need to know how to do by the end of this course. Then the next few pages are going to be multiple choice practice. A lot of times we don't do that in class. That's for you. Your tests will always be half multiple choice, half show your work, for the most part. I'll tell you if they're different though. Those multiple choice questions are extra practice for you to prepare for your test. This is where our notes are starting. So this is what I need you to find. We're going to take notes, like I said, pretty much the whole class. I will not sit and lecture for 80 minutes though. So I will sit and talk for a while, give you some examples. We will always take a break somewhere in the middle. Okay, today's notes are very heavy in the vocabulary. So that's what we're going to start with. Some pieces of vocabulary. Well, first of all, let's talk about what is the point of statistics. The point of stats, I'm just going to talk, you don't have to write this down. You want to know something about a group of people. So you might want to know what is the average amount of time that students at Prospect spend on homework. What I could do is I could go and ask every single student, how much time do you work on homework? And then average those numbers. Why would I not do that though?
It would take too much time.
Okay, I certainly don't have the time to go talk to every single student. And so oftentimes what I do is I take a sample and I collect data from that sample. So you all might be my sample, and I might ask every one of you, how much time do you spend on homework? You all are the individuals. You are the actual objects or people that are being sampled. And then the variable in this case is what is being measured. Oh.
These are all for places.
Thanks, appreciate it. Okay, so the individuals are who or what is being studied. Would you like to staple that?
Then
No.
afterwards.
Okay. The variable, so the big case here is who or what. The variable is what is being measured. So in our example, you all as students were the individuals, and what was being measured, the variable, was the amount of time spent on homework. The reason that an individual can be a what is it's not always a person. It's not always a living thing, right? So if you think of car accidents, if I'm looking at the cars involved in the accidents, the cars could be the individuals, right? So those are not living things. So oftentimes what I would do is I would ask every individual, how much time did you spend on homework? And then I will display it in a distribution. This is a huge, huge keyword that is going to stick around for the whole course. And so this one is very important. The distribution displays the possible values of the variable and how often they occur. Often, this is done in a table or a graph. And we see this example right here. This example lists a whole bunch of cars and their miles per gallon. Maybe it's highway miles per gallon. The cars are individuals. So again, not living things, but they're what is being studied. Miles per gallon would be the variable. This first table is the raw data. It is the raw data because it lists every single individual. Oftentimes, we do not care about the raw data. I don't care that an Acura RL gets 22 miles per gallon. I want to know about miles per gallon in general. So what is more helpful to us is if we can look at something like this graph, where we see, okay, 25, 26 is pretty common, 28, 29 is pretty common. We can see all of the values together and how often they occur. We can see that 14 is pretty unusual. We can see out of our sample, none of the cars have 34 or more. This graph right here is called a dot plot. In this first unit, we're going to learn many different types of graphs. So sometimes a table is beneficial, sometimes we want a graph instead. So there's a whole bunch of things that I could do with these cars. I could look at the miles per gallon. I could look at the safety rating. If I had actual cars, I could look at their color. All of those things are variables. Some of them are categorical and some of them are quantitative. Categorical variables are usually words, and it's when you put the values into categories. So if I went to the cars in the parking lot and recorded their colors, that's a categorical variable because I'm taking the cars and putting them into categories by color. Quantitative, the other word for that is numeric. That's generally the one that I will use. So quantitative and numeric, those are the same. These are generally numbers, but not always. Well, no. Numeric are always numbers. But just because you have a number doesn't mean it's numeric, and we'll talk about that. A numeric variable measures something. So if we went into the parking lot and measured the weight of cars, the highest speed they go, their miles per gallon, all of those are numeric. People can get tripped up here when deciding categorical or quantitative variables. Like, people will sometimes look at this table and say, well, this is quantitative variable because of the car. The car, though, is not a variable. So it's really important when you have data that you identify what are the individuals, what's actually being measured. So we need to be sure to differentiate between the who, so the individuals, and the what, which are the variables. So we need to pay attention to who are we asking or sampling, those being the individuals, and what is actually being measured. Okay, this is where I'm going to ask for some audience participation. Categorical variables, I said, are normally words. So if we went around and asked, what's your hair color? That's a categorical variable. What's your eye color? That's a categorical variable. Can you think of a categorical variable, though, where we use numbers instead? Where I would ask you a question, and you would respond with a number, and those numbers would be put into categories.
Favorite number?
Favorite number, maybe.
I'm
Sure.
trying to think of something with numbers that isn't measuring something, which is kind of hard.
Age, sometimes we can take age and put it into categories, yeah. What do you think? What question would I be asking all of you that related to time? If I asked what time do you get up, maybe we would put those into categories. So age, time. There are two other big ones that I'm thinking of that, like Luke said, don't measure something. And they have to do with geography. Two numbers that you see pretty often that describe something in our geographic area. Kiara?
Like longitude and latitude?
Longitude and latitude. If we put them into categories, sure. That's not something that we see very often. Something that you see like on a weekly basis. That has to do with where you live.
Address.
What part of your address would you say gets put into categories?
Area code.
Whoa, there we go. Area code. Area code. Okay, related to area code. This one might be a little bit more of a stretch. And I don't know that you guys say these things or share them very often anymore. What? In the back?
Phone number?
Okay, what part of your phone number?
First 3 digits?
First 3 digits? Yeah, what is that called?
I don't know.
That is the area code. Yeah, zip code is what I was thinking of. Zip code is like your 60056. Area code is the 847-224, things like that. So just because a variable has numbers does not make it numeric. You need to think about, what is it measuring? Is it measuring something, or is it being put into a category? Now think about numeric or quantitative variables. Are there ever times when we take those numbers and put them, bless you, into categories? So like theoretically, if I asked you, how long did it take you to get to school today? I could take your answers and put them into categories, right? What are some other numbers that generally get put into categories?
Well,
I would say age, again, generally gets put into categories, right? You're a teenager, you're a young adult, you're an adult, you're a senior, things like that. A lot of times test scores will get put into categories. You're meeting expectations, you're exceeding expectations, so on and so forth. And so one thing I want you to notice is age shows up in both. Age is a number. It can be categorical, it can be numeric. The question is, how do you decide? It depends on how you want to use the data. Here's what I mean by that. If you put the data into categories, that data is categorical. And you're like, yeah, duh. If you want, let's say, an average, what's the stats word for average? The mean. So if you want an average or a mean, you will treat that data as quantitative. Again, the term I prefer is numeric. Okay, questions? Okay, so what we're going to do is you all are going to do an example, we'll go over it, and then we'll probably take a break. Does that work for us? Okay, on the next page, here's what you're looking at. You have this data table at the top, and it says this is information about 10 randomly selected Canadian residents from the 2000 census. What you are going to be doing with the person next to you in a minute is you are going to be doing parts A and B, identifying the individuals, identifying the variables, and then telling me, are those variables categorical or quantitative? One thing I want to show us in this data table, generally the rows are the individuals. And generally, each column is a variable. That is how the data is generally displayed. That's not always the case, no. Why is that one individual green? I don't know. It just is. Doesn't matter, though. So generally, the rows are the individuals. The columns are generally the different variables. And one thing that I want to point out to us is that this is the raw data. I keep saying that because we're going to see data eventually that is not the raw data. Raw data just means it shows every single individual and all of their responses. Okay, we already talked about part A. Let's talk about part B. I already told us variable is all of the columns. You can leave your desks where they are. Gender, is that categorical or quantitative?
Categorical.
Categorical. What about languages spoken?
Quantitative.
I think we can argue either way. I would consider it quantitative. Quantitative or numeric because we're measuring something. Handed,
Categorical.
categorical, height,
Like,
numeric, right? Numeric, categorical, numeric. Sound good? We okay on that? Okay, we need to be specific. So saying wrist is not going to get you credit. Wrist is not a variable. The variable is wrist circumference in millimeters. Do I care that much? No. The AP test is going to care though. There are times when I've seen if you write wrist circumference, you don't get credit unless you have the units. So we're just going to start getting in the habit now of being that specific. Questions or comments for me? This activity we don't have time for, so we're just moving right on along. Okay, what we are going to talk about for the rest of class is categorical data specifically. So when I ask a question or I collect data and I take those answers and I put them into categories, we're going to talk about what do we do with that data? How do we display the distribution? Okay, so what is the difference we need to know between a data table, a frequency table, and a relative frequency table? Data table is the raw data with the responses from all of the individuals. Okay, a frequency table, on the other hand. This is really a way to summarize. It shows the possible values and their frequencies. So let's say in our class I cared about what color is your eyes. And you can have blue eyes, brown, green. Are there any other options?
Hazel is something I've heard of.
Is hazel different than brown? Yes, it
Pretty
is.
sure it is on government IDs.
Okay. We're going to do a quick show of hands. Can you raise your hand for me if you have blue eyes?
I don't know.
4. Okay. 4 people have blue eyes. If you have brown eyes. Oh my gosh. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think it's 16. If you have green eyes. 1, 2, 3. Hazel eyes?
What do my eyes look like? 'Cause
I don't know. You're way too far away from me. Brown? Brown.
Okay.
Okay.
That's not one of the things I know off the top of my head.
That is frequency. It doesn't have each of you as individuals. It just has what are the possible values, how often do they occur. Relative frequency is just the fraction or decimal. So if we add up our table, there's 24 people there. So the relative frequency of blue would be 4 out of 24. Brown would be 16 out of 24. So on and so forth. 3 out of 24, 1 out of 24. And you could write those as decimals. That's fine. I'm not going to because I can't do that off the top of my head.
Yeah, and that's not a real, and 24 is not a good thing to make
Yeah.
decimals out of anyway.
These should all, of course, sum to 1. Relative frequency is not the same thing as percent, though. So that is something I will be picky about. If I asked you for a relative frequency and you give me a percent, those are different. Okay. A lot of times you will see both. They're pretty interchangeable, the frequency versus relative frequency. But there is one time in particular when it is better to use relative frequency. You have to use relative frequency when you are comparing different groups. So if I wanted to look at eye color between my first block class and my second block class, I would have to use relative frequency. You are 2 different groups.
That makes sense, because relative frequency, it's relative to something else.
Yeah. Okay. Constructing a bar graph. You have to know how to construct a bar graph. Have you guys made bar graphs before?
Not in a while.
Not in a while, but you have made them, yes? One thing I need you to know, a bar graph is only for categorical data. Only for categorical data. So on the first page of our notes, we saw that dot plot. That was for numeric data. Categorical data, there are not that many graphs. Really, the biggest one is a bar graph. What you're going to do is you will have your categories on the x-axis. So in our case, that was eye color. And then you will label each of your bars. So we had blue, brown, green, and hazel. Of course, hopefully we have more room than that. And then you'll have your various bars. I'm just going to approximate. I know this is not correct, but you get the idea. If I don't tell you, then on the y-axis, you can use frequency or relative frequency. Few things to point out to you. You have to have a label on the y-axis. You have to have a label on the x-axis. A lot of people forget this eye color part. They'll label each of the bars, but they won't put a label as to what those bars represent. Other thing with a bar graph to know, you are going to have a title, of course. I don't care what the title is. I'm not picky. It doesn't need to be bar graph of. I don't really care as long as there's some type of context in it. And then the other thing that's important to know is in a bar graph, there is space between the bars. There's another type of graph that you will see that looks almost exactly the same except the bars are next to each other. If it's a bar graph, there has to be space. Yes?
For the y-axis, do you have to be more specific, or can you just say frequency?
Frequency is totally fine. Okay. Next thing to talk about. Oftentimes, when you have a graph, you're then going to describe in words what that graph is showing. If we look at this graph, what a lot of people will do is they say, most people have brown eyes, and then blue, and then green. That's not very specific. We need to be more specific than that. You can't just list out in order. I want to know how much more frequent. If I say most people have brown eyes and then blue, you have no idea what the difference is.
It could
You
be
know-
just one person.
Could be just one person. So I want to know something like about twice as many people have brown eyes as blue eyes. So we would say, I can say the most frequent response is brown eyes occurring twice as often as blue. So now we know what the difference between brown and blue is. You cannot say something like, or should not say something like, 2 more people have brown than blue. If I say 2 people, is that a lot? Well, it depends. How big is the sample? 2 people out of 100 is not a lot. 2 people out of 10 is a lot. So that's why I don't want 2 more or 10% more. Twice as is better. So then if we compare blue to green, we could say something like, again, my bars really stink, about twice as many people have blue eyes as green eyes. About 2 times as many have blue as green. This is a very bare bones response because I don't have a lot of room because I write too big. You need to make sure from your response it is clear who the individuals are and what your variable is. So like I need to know that we're looking at eye color. You don't need to say it in every single sentence, but as long as somewhere in your response you have eye color, that is sufficient. Okay. Next thing, the other way to display categorical data is with a pie chart. So pie charts are also for categorical data. Pie charts and bar charts are the only 2 charts for categorical data. Statisticians, for the most part, don't use pie charts. Really, the only time you're going to see a pie chart is in a newspaper or in an article, and it's because people are familiar with them. But
it's more eye-catching or something.
It's more eye-catching.
Presentation.
It's hard to construct by hand, so that's why we don't use them. Most important thing to remember is labels. Those are the labels I pointed out in green. Labeling the y-axis, the x-axis, putting a title. Eventually you might get to the point of needing a key. Okay, and then the reason that bar charts are better than pie charts, there's really 2 of them. 1, bar charts are easier to construct. In bar charts, it's easier to compare the differences in categories, particularly when the differences are small. If there are small differences between 2 categories in a pie chart, it's very difficult to see.
Sliver, and sometimes you just lump a bunch of those small slivers together into just a verb.
Yep. And then there's one more that I've thought of. We can use bar charts to compare 2 groups. We can't in a pie chart. So like I've been saying, what if we're comparing your class to the next class with eye color? There's no way for me to do that in a pie chart. What I could do in a bar chart, though, is let's say that you all are the blue. I could put my next class right next to it. And then we could see the 2 groups at the same time. Can't do that with a pie chart. I know I'm throwing a lot at us. Questions? No? Okay. We're going to talk about a few more things, and then we'll probably take one more break before finishing up the notes. There are some common ways to make misleading graphs that I need us to be aware of. The first way is 3D graphs. So these are all things you want to avoid. You want to avoid a 3D graph. So using a 3D picture instead of a bar. The other one is if we don't start the y-axis at 0. This is the most common one, and here's why. Let's say we're only comparing two things. I don't know. This is what we're comparing. And I start this graph at 0. And I don't know, it's frequency or relative frequency. If instead I decided to start the graph here,
Well, that's just exaggerating the results.
does it not look like the difference between these two is a whole lot bigger than if I'm looking at the whole bars? That's the issue. So that's why we have to start at 0 versus some other number. So those are the two most common ones. Okay. Two more things to talk about, and then, like I said, we'll take a break before finishing notes. What you see right here is what is called a two-way table. A two-way table. It displays two different variables. Well, no, it displays one variable for different groups. So we looked at young adults, and they told us gender and what the chance of getting rich is.
I'm not gonna question how they gained that data.
There are two different distributions that you need to know about. So remember, distribution I said on the first page is a word that comes up a lot. It's what are the possible values, how often do they occur? What are the possible values, how often do they occur? So there's what we call a marginal distribution, and then there's what is called a conditional distribution. A marginal distribution is the distribution of a single categorical variable. So I could display gender only or chance of getting rich. So if I were looking at chance of getting rich, I don't care about how many males or females said that. All I care about are these total numbers. So I would look at how many people said almost no chance, how many people said some chance, so on and so forth. Or I could look at gender, not caring about the responses that they gave. That is a marginal distribution. How do we display a marginal distribution? Well, it's a categorical variable, so we would do a bar chart. So again, for my examples, I could do gender, or I could do the chance of getting rich. Now, if we want to look at both together, like what is the difference between the females who said their chances of getting rich and the males who said their chances of getting rich? That is called a conditional distribution. A conditional distribution is the distribution of a categorical variable for one category of a different categorical variable. Okay, how do you know what you want to condition on? Whatever you think is your independent variable. So if you think of like X versus Y, independent versus dependent. Now X versus Y doesn't make sense in this case because we're looking at categorical data, not numeric. But you're thinking of what affects the other one. So we have two different conditional distributions. I could look at the female responses compared to the male, Or I could look at each of these responses separately. Female versus male, female versus male, female versus male. Either one of those would work. I think it makes the most sense to have the male distribution and then the female distribution. That is the last thing that we will do before we take our break. So the way that we normally do that is what is called a stacked bar chart. Or we could do what is called a comparative. The comparative is what we drew at the top. So I'm going to move the page and I'll come back. This is a comparative bar chart. This would be like the males being in blue, the female responses being in black. That is a comparative bar chart. It's not very common, but it is one way to do it. Instead, what we're going to display down here is we're going to make a stacked bar chart. The way a stacked bar chart works is your bars can go horizontally or vertically. I'm going to go horizontally because I have more room. So what I will do is I will have two different bars, one for the female responses and one for the male. Because we are comparing two groups, we want to use relative frequency. Of course, I would put a title. I'm going to label my y-axis that this is gender. Okay, so the relative frequency, we are going to put all of them together, so it's going to sum up to 1. So then this is about 0.5. I am, in the interest of time, we're going to make this graph, but I'm not going to put a whole heck of a lot of effort or time into it. Is that okay? Okay, so here's what we're going to do. In our female graph, we need to put all of the responses. So we need to be able to see how many people said almost no chance, how many people said some chance, so on and so forth. All we care about is the 2,367 females. So what we will do is we will take each of these numbers and divide by 2367. So if I take the 96 and I divide by 2367, I get about 0.04. Really, really small number. So that is about here. Then I'm going to take this 426 and divide by the 2367. And that's about 0.18. That needs to be 0.18 more. So I will need to keep this bar going and get myself to 0.18. Oh man. I'm going to draw the entire bar first and then just segment it. So my 0.18 is about there. So then I'm going to keep going. Then I would do my 696 divided by 2367. And that's about 0.3. So then I'm going to go about 0.3 more. So that's going to be a little bit over 0.5. And then so on and so forth. And then we need to differentiate between these. So maybe the first bar is blank. The second one I'm going to fill in. The third one maybe has dots. Maybe I do then, ooh, that's probably not great. Then maybe I do some lines and then maybe some stars. And so then we would need a key that tells us what each of those mean. We would then do the same thing for male. not gonna do that, but you would go about the same process. 98 divided by the total, 286 divided by the total, so on and so forth. Again, this is one way to do it. The other way would have been a comparative bar chart. That would be almost no chance, male, female. Some chance, male, female. So on and so forth. Questions, comments? Yes?
When putting in the key, would you segment it by, like, would you say almost no chance of getting rich, or some chance of getting rich each time for the key, or would you just say of almost no chance?
I think almost no chance is fine. As long as somewhere you have written chance of getting rich. So in the title, somewhere, as long as those words are okay. But I don't need you to waste your time writing it over and over. Thank you for asking. Are we ready for another break? I'm ready for a break too.
Can I go to the bathroom?
Okay, last thing we need to talk about. The reason we have conditional distributions like this is so that we can compare differences between groups. So if we had a complete graph, we would be able to compare the differences in the responses to this question of chance of getting rich between males and females. That's what we're gonna do on the next page. We are looking at this example all the way at the bottom. So this is the last example we're gonna do in these notes. The Pew Research Center asked a random sample of 2024 adult cell phone owners from the US which type of cell phone they own, iPhone, Android, or other. Here are the results broken down by category. We are gonna do a few of these, and then you're gonna do a few of them also. Part A, what proportion of iPhone owners were 55 or older? Okay, proportion just means a fraction or a decimal. So this says of iPhone owners, which means we are only looking at iPhone owners. All we care about are these 467 people. So out of those 467 people, how many were 55 or older? 127. Leaving your answer like that, perfectly fine. You don't even have to simplify. You don't have to give me a decimal, nothing. If you want to, though, the decimal is about 0.272.
Yep, that's all I got.
In part B, what percent of 18 to 34-year-olds owned Android phones? So this time, we're looking at 18 to 34-year-olds only. So all I care about is the 517 18 to 34-year-olds. Out of those, how many owned Androids? 214. This time, we are asked for a percent. So I don't want a decimal this time. I want a percent. That percent ends up being about 41. Okay, the marginal distribution we're not going to do. But if we were going to, it says display the marginal distribution of cell phone type. What that means is all we care about is cell phone type. We don't care about the ages. So you could do it in two different ways. The first way is you could display the iPhone, Android, and other. So iPhone, Android, other. Of course, labels and numbers, and you would do it much better than I'm doing it right now. Or you could do it as a segmented bar chart. It would just be one bar, iPhone, Android, other. We're not doing that. You could, though. What you are going to do with the person next to you over the next 5 or 6 minutes when I'm done talking is you're going to do part E. Display the relationship between age group and cell phone type. Age group and cell phone type. That is going to be like the last example we did, where it's going to be a segmented bar chart, one for each group. I want us to do it the same way, though. So what we could do is we could do bars for iPhone, Android, other, or we could do bars for the age groups. It doesn't really matter. What would you prefer to do? Do you want bars for iPhone, Android, other, or do you want to do bars for the ages?
Ages.
Ages.
Yeah, that
So
feels
then
like
we
a,
would have 3 bars. 1 bar representing the 18 to 34 year olds, 1 bar representing the 35 to 54. Does that work for us? Your bars can go vertically or horizontally. Let's try to be done and come back together at 9:40. I'm gonna make one also. Move your desks if you would like to. Did you all get the same graph, generally? So some few things. We should have labeled that these numbers represent age. We should have used relative frequency. All 3 bars, mine are a little messy, but all 3 should get to 1. I put my numbers in here just for you. You should not write the numbers in there. Have a key of some type. I used 3 colors. One that I saw a lot of you use was like white versus filled in versus dots. That's green too. It just has to be clear enough that I can see the differences. Make sure you have a title of some type. What I want to talk about real quick is, do you think there is a relationship between age and type of phone?
yes.
Yes.
Yes. How can we tell?
The other keeps getting bigger.
What?
The other keeps getting bigger the older you get.
Okay. The big difference, the bars aren't the same. Right? If there was no relationship at all between age and type of phone, this bar should be the same as this one, should be the same as, what I mean by that is the age. So this would just be happening 3 times. But because there's differences in these bars, we know that there's a relationship of some type between age and cell phone type. That relationship is called an association. When you come to class Monday, we are going to put that into words. What does the association show? Okay.